Hey y'all, today instead of our normal Bible Bite, we're going to have something a little bit different that we're going to start doing on Saturdays called Saturday Specials. That's not just a biblical encouragement, but also gets into other areas that our ministry is involved in as far as trainings or apologetics. But one area that our ministry has been involved in for over a year has been podcasts. And if you're not already connected with our podcast, you should check them out at greatcommissionalliance.org/listen. We have podcasts on leadership, apologetics, and amazing missionary stories, which is going to be what we're looking at today. So if you want to get connected with all the awesome audio content we have, go to greatcommissionalliance.org/listen. So we hope you enjoy today's Saturday special.
Hello, and welcome to the Living Wilder podcast, where we hope to equip, encourage, and even challenge you to live adventurous and Christ-filled lives through wild steps of faith. Jesus promised us the abundant life in John chapter 10, verse 10. We know life was not just meant for routine, so let's live wilder. I'm Philip Wilder, and I'm so excited to have you here with us. Please check out greatcommissionalliance.org/listen to see our other past shows. Again, that's greatcommissionalliance.org/listen. Today we have with us James R. Hannibal, who's an accomplished Christian author and a retired Air Force pilot who has seen a lot of action. So I'm excited to hear what he has to share with us and the adventures that he gets to share with us on this show. So welcome to the show, James.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be with you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm so excited to hear more about your story. But to start things off, I hear bits and snippets of your story, and honestly, it's just really cool to hear all that God's done through you. So before we really get into these adventurous stories, can you just start off real quick by sharing with our with our listeners, more about who you are and what you've done with your life so far?
All right, so I am a former U.S. Air Force stealth pilot. I started at the Air Force Academy, got a degree in Middle Eastern Studies and counterterrorism, and went on to fly the A-10 Thunderbolt, which some people know as the tank killer. And so that was my fighter seat. I flew that over in Europe and the Middle East, and then came back to the United States and flew the stealth bomber, the B-2, and flew that for a few years in the United States and over in the Pacific, and then left the active duty Air Force to become an airline pilot, where I also started writing books and wrote some covert ops adventures that I had to run through security committees before they could go to publishers. And at the same time was flying for the airlines, and then also worked for the Air National Guard, flying the drones. So I flew the Predator drones and worked in the Afghan and Iraq theaters with those as well. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Wow, that's quite a rap sheet you've got there. So I'm curious, how long did you actually fly with the Air Force?
So I flew active duty. I flew from 1998 to 2007. And then with the Predators, I flew from the end of 2009 until 2015. All told, about 15 years combined. And then one of the cool things with being a stealth bomber pilot is I ended up with some very, very high clearances. And so that led me into some extracurricular activities that unfortunately I don't get to discuss very often, but I can kind of use covert ops fiction as a catharsis to talk about.
I know exactly what you're talking about to a much smaller degree. In that, just living in the Middle East, I couldn't tell anyone that I was a missionary. And so there's just like this whole side of it where it's like, I wish I could just tell you the real reason why I'm here. But like even good friends that I had for like 2 years there, I couldn't tell them at all, which was quite the bummer. But
yeah, absolutely.
It's all for a higher cause. So in all of this, did you grow up in a Christian family? When did you meet Christ?
So my dad is a pastor and a seminary professor. He was, for a time, the dean of adult and continuing education at Dallas Baptist College, or Dallas Baptist University, sorry. And then he's also, right now, he's an adjunct professor at Denver Theological Seminary, helping
Oh, cool.
folks with their dissertation. And he's the theological advisor on our Light Raider game series. But so I'm very blessed to have grown up in a Christian home with a man. He's also was an Air Force pilot and then chaplain. So I grew up with a Christian man of action as my father, and so obviously he had a huge impact on my life. I first dedicated my life to Christ at the age of 7, and then rededicated my life to Christ at the age of 14, sort of during that transition into manhood. And 3 years later, I was at the Air Force Academy beginning my military career.
Wow. That's pretty similar to my story, I feel like, in a lot of ways. That's cool. Well, I'm glad that you had that sort of upbringing and that it was a positive experience. You don't hear that all that often, unfortunately. How then, being a Christian, what then led you to join the Air Force? Was it just kind of, I don't want to say following in your dad's footsteps, but maybe you were inspired by him?
I think that's the best way to put it. That's a very good way to put it. Not just by him, but by his circle of friends. So, yeah, when I joined the military, I certainly met my fair share of folks who did not know Christ. And we can talk later about how I tried to be a witness there. But when I was growing up in the home of a Christian man with military service, who was also the child of a Christian man with military service, those multi-generational impact led to our home being filled with Christian men of action. And so, and for a time we lived in Colorado Springs next to the Air Force Academy. I spent a lot of time there and with Christian men and women who were involved there. And so they had such an impact on me that by the age of 17, I had a huge sense of duty. And I also had this dream of becoming a fighter pilot. And that's really what led me into the service.
Wow. That's really cool. Yeah, I wish more people had stories like that. I feel like a lot of us, we grew up in a Christian household, or maybe we meet Jesus, but we don't really have people who inspire us to really step out. I feel like it kind of becomes like Christian gluttony in a sense. Like we absorb as much as we can, but then we don't really think about turning around and like really making a difference in the world. It's just kind of like, well, my relationship with Jesus is set and we're good. So it's really good to hear stories like yours where people are challenged and really see that they need to step back out and make a difference.
Yeah, that's a passion for me, is getting out there and having, Christians not just be followers of Christ, but soldiers for Christ, reaching out for the kingdom, because that's our great commission.
Yeah. So yeah, normally on this podcast, I'm interviewing missionaries. Of course, not every missionary is a vocational missionary, but the other thing that I really look for as far as people that I interview on these podcasts and talk with are people who have stories of adventure where they've really been forced to trust Christ. And I've heard bits and pieces of your stories, but one that really struck me, especially having lived in the Middle East for 2 years, I'm real curious. You've mentioned that at one point you were being chased by a terrorist. So please tell us adventure seekers what that was like.
All right, so this is pre 9/11 in 2001, but before September. And Al Qaeda at the time was reaching out their fingers, and they were encouraging lone wolf terrorists. And so there was a Turkish immigrant in Germany who took it upon himself to become one of these lone wolf terrorists. And he sought out the American families in the area near Spengdahlem Air Base in Germany. And so, I talk about when I was over Iraq and getting shot at or getting locked up with missiles. But this is the day that really scared me, because my wife was with me. And so the bullets don't usually follow me home and come after my family. But in this case, we were leaving the main base and heading to our house, which is closer to sort of the base annex. And it was the evening, it was after a day of flying, and Cindy and I had been to the gym. And so, it was like the worst moment to get into an action scene, right? Your body's trashed. You're already spent. And I was so trashed that nowadays Cindy drives me ever since this incident. In fact, Cindy is always the driver. we discovered her amazing talents as a race car driver in that moment, driving a little Honda CRV on the most dangerous road. It's the second most dangerous road in Germany. The B50 has the second most amount of deaths in all of Germany. This stretch of road between the two bases, winding curves, sheer cliffs, all that stuff. So we had just left the base. Cindy was driving because my arms were so tired. And not long after we left the base, a guy pulls in from a side road in a little red Opel. It's kind of like a little Toyota Camry for European cars. This little red Opel, and the guy is right on our tail, so close that we can't see his license plate. And so I'm like, what is his problem? And I look back, and he's got a gun. And so he is doing his thing. He wasn't the brightest terrorist, but he was going to try to get a shot off. And I'm, no kidding. I'm like looking at my wife like serpentine, but we're already on this windy road. So now Cindy's got the pedal to the metal. There's a terrorist behind us doing the same, and he's trying to line up a shot. And I wish I could say that it was my idea, but Cindy knew that the police station in Bitburg was close to our house, and we certainly didn't want to lead this guy to our home. Mm-hmm. So we jetted right past our house as if it wasn't there, and she went into the police station parking lot. And this guy apparently was okay with killing somebody, but he didn't want to get caught. So he went on past. And so her quick thinking and good driving is what saved our life that day. And I was over there just praying. It's pretty much all I was capable of doing, there in the passenger seat. But what happened, kind of the rest of the story, is we went and we made a report to the security forces. They didn't believe us. Again, this was pre 9/11. We hadn't seen terrorists outside of the Middle East too often. So it was kind of filed away. But the very next day, the guy in our neighborhood went looking for an American family, and instead of us, he found another pair of Americans, and found them on foot, drew the gun, and an off-duty security forces officer saw what was happening and tackled him. Wow. And he didn't get a clean shot, and so nobody was injured, and the guy was caught. But anyway, that's my big scary story. That was the moment when if this guy fires off a round and hits my wife, she's gone. And there's no, and I was, when you're the fighter pilot, you're in the driver's seat, you have control of the weapons. It was that moment when I had no control at all over the situation, and the only thing I could do was pray.
Wow, I can't even imagine that. How fast did you guys end up going down that road?
I checked her speedometer at one point, and I think I saw 76, which for that little CRV was pretty good. And given the curves on that road, was about as fast as you were going to get. I mean, it is all curves and cliffs and things right up until we get to, and I think she probably beat that on the final stretch up the street into Bitburg, because there's a straightaway all the way to the police station that's probably about a quarter mile. So on that quarter mile, I think she did better. But the fastest I saw was 76.
Is that kilometers per hour or miles?
No, we had our car shipped over from Texas, so yeah, it was miles per hour.
Classic Americans. That's pretty crazy. So were there lots of cars that you guys had to dodge between, or?
No, and that's where the angels come in, because that road is always full of traffic. In fact, one of the worst things on that road are the Eiffel Cadillacs. Okay, so the region between Spangdahlem and Bitburg, and really north of Trier, Germany, is called the Eifel. And it's an old volcanic region of a lot of hills, highly fertile, and there's a lot of farmland because of the fertility of the area. And so Eiffel Cadillacs are tractors. And one of the problems with that road is with all the curves and bends, people go super fast on that road and they try to get around the Eiffel Cadillacs, and that's when the head-ons happen. That's when people go off the cliff, everything else. So we didn't see one Eiffel Cadillac on that road. I think we passed maybe one other car, us and our terrorist friend. But that was, again, the angels. So that's the moment when you go, God wanted us to make it to another day.
Right. Wow. That's just amazing. What did you think looking back on this? Like, what did God teach you during that time?
Well, God taught me that you're a fighter pilot. I'm at the time I'm a I don't know, what was I, 20, 23, 24-year-old fighter pilot. 24. 20 oh no, wow. 25 or 6. Anyway, somewhere in there. I was a 20-something fighter pilot. You're invincible. I'm used to flying around with surrounded by a titanium tub with a giant gun full of 1,100 rounds of 30 millimeter. And you get a tendency to feel like you're the guy always in control. You have complete control over your own fate. And there was that moment of, I have no control. I have to depend entirely on God and my wife's amazing driving skills to survive, for both of us to survive this.
Wow. And the carryover with that story is, technically, no matter where we're at, no matter what we're doing, we're always depending entirely upon God. Yes, maybe in your case it was an extra degree of dependence because you couldn't steer, you couldn't do anything, but in the end, I mean, we're always depending upon God. If we rely too much on our own abilities, that's when we run into difficulties.
That's our illusion. Our illusion is that we're in control, and God's in control. God's in complete control. And it took that situation for God, as a fighter pilot, for God to take that illusion away from me, and help me to learn to depend on him more. And I'm still learning every day.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, I'm really excited to get more into some of your crazy, dangerous, or adventurous stories here, but do you have a quick kind of humorous story that you think would just be really fun to top off this podcast with?
All right, so I'll see how fast I can do this. Probably the funniest story from my career is how I got my call sign. Fighter pilots have call signs, like a nickname, right? And my call sign was Otto. And so the story is how that happened. We were in Slovakia. Slovakia at the time was trying to get into NATO. And we were part of a goodwill effort from NATO to sort of maybe welcome them into the fold. But there was a lot of Eastern European influence still there. As far as there's a lot of Soviet influence, I should say, still there. In fact, on that trip there, we caught a Russian spy. We found listening devices. There was all sorts of cool things that happened. But the funny thing that happened was how I got my name, because my fighter squadron commander was mortified that he had a lieutenant under his command that did not drink alcohol. I am a non-drinker. And he thought that this would make us look weak in front of the former Soviet pilots of Slovakia. And so he said, do not tell these guys you don't drink. You're always the designated driver because you're the youngest guy here. And so that's what we went with. And after a week of this, the Slovakians would pass me in the locker room at the fighter squadron and slap me hard on the arm and go, hey, Otto, and keep on going. Most of them didn't speak English. So after a couple of days of this, I went to Vladimir, our translator, and I said, what's up with this Otto thing? And Vladimir says, well, we are not stupid. We know that you do not drink. And in Slovakia, there are only 2 pilots who do not drink. The one is statue of great hero in front of headquarters. And I'm thinking, oh, cool, Otto von somebody, And Vladimir says, you are not great Slovakian hero. The other pilot who does not drink is the Otto pilot. You are the Otto pilot. So that's how I got my call sign. The only pilot in Slovakia that doesn't drink is the Otto pilot. Yeah, so AUTO, not OTTO.
That's awesome. Well, I wonder if I was flying what my call sign would be.
It's never something that you want. I've flown with guys called Pop-Tart.
Okay.
I had a guy that I flew with a guy named Claw. And Claw is a great fighter call sign, except for the reason that he got that is while we were setting up a deployment center, he smacked his finger with a hammer and went, ah! And so he earned the call sign cries like a woman. And that's what Claw stands for.
Nice. Well, I'm sure that helps people remember it. Maybe this is how I should start learning how to memorize my verses.
There you go.
Apply
Acronym.
crazy stories to it.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm excited to continue this conversation in our next episode. But thank you again so much for making the time to join with us here today. And thank you all of our listeners for joining in. Please check out greatcommissionalliance.org/listen for more encouraging podcasts. We post these on a weekly basis. And if you'd like to be encouraged in your adventurous walk with Christ, or if you'd like to hear more about how you can take part in this wild living, you can check out philipwilder.com or find me on Facebook or Instagram at Philip_Wilder_author. I'm Philip Wilder, and until next time, stay strong, root yourself in Christ and His Word, and live wilder.